We're at the very top of Ayin Daled Amid Aleph. So the last thing the Gemara had said was the Shita of Rav Yechanan, at least the second version of Yechanan, said if an animal has a limb that's dangling off when it's alive, it's connected by skin, but it's not really connected anymore. See, if the animal were to die, then that limb is considered Evim and Achai. We don't look at it straight in a vela. We look at it as when the animal died, it's Ki'ilu, the limb was severed. But if the animal were to be shechted, that limb is tahar. You can't eat the limb, but the tumah is removed. The shechita at least affects the limb that it removes the tumah. So Rav Yosef kamei de Rav Huna. Rav Yosef was sitting before Rav Huna. Rav Yosef and Rav Yosef said, Amar Rav Huna Marav, he quoted Rav, Achlu lazeh loika. If you eat this dangling limb, seemingly after the shechita, you get malchus. Now, that's very strange because we just got finished saying yesterday that if you shecht it, it's a biblically recognized shechita. It's Chazal that said that you can't eat it. But okay, he said you get malchus. Amalahu. So one of the Rabbanan said to Rav Huna, whom of the Rabbanan, Loita Tzisus, don't listen to Rav Yosef. Hachi Amar Rav Yisrael Bar Shmuel Bar Marta Mishri the Rav, because I heard in the name of Rav, that there's no lashes. That if you eat that dangling limb, it's only an Issa D'Rabbanan. So Rav Yosef is quoting Rav as saying it's an Asa D'Raisa, but a certain Rav said, don't listen to him, because I have heard that it's only Issa D'Rabbanan. So Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna hears these two conflicting reports in the name of Rav regarding the dangling limb. He says, Anon Amon Nisnach, who should we follow? So Hadrin Rav Yosef Aper, Rav Yosef was very upset. Rav Yosef turned around angry. Amar my kusha, what's bothering you? It says Rav Yosef, there's no machlokes. I said it's Asa D'Oraisa, he said it's Asa D'Rabbanan. They're both saying the same thing. Ki Amri, I know, when did I say it's Asa D'Rabbanan? I'm sorry, Asa D'Oraisa, b'misa d'Oisa nipo. It's a case where the animal is not shechted. Meaning, if the animal dies without shechita, so it's Asa D'Oraisa. First of all, it's an avela, but he's saying it's Asa D'Oraisa, even menachai. Ki Amar Iu, and when the other rabbi quoted Rav as saying it's only Asa D'Rabbanan, it was b'shchita deinani. So he's talking about a case where we're shechted. If the animal was shechted, then that limb is only an Asa D'Rabbanan. So there's no machlokes. Amar Rava, Menaha milsad Amar Rabbanan misa isanipo shchita einaisipol. So Rava says, where is the source in the Torah for this thing regarding the dangling limb? That if the animal were to die, the dangling limb is look as if it's separated when it's alive and it's ev menachai. But if you were to shech the animal, the dangling limb is mutam in Torah. Where do you find such a thing? And the tumah is removed from the dangling limb if you shech it. D'chsiv, because the pasuk says. Now this pasuk is regarding shrotzim, but as the Gemara is going to point out, this entire pasuk seems to be, at least as a word extra. So we're going to teach this pasuk is not referring to a sheretz, but really referring to a cow, or really referring to our discussion. Because the pasuk says, "V'chol asher yipol alav mehem b'maisam yitma." Anything that will fall on them when they're dead shall be tummy. Now the simple pshat of the pasuk is that it's telling you if you touch a dead sheretz, you tummy. The problem is I already know this. Why do you have to say b'maisam? So you know what the pshat is? It's not referring to shrotzim at all. This pasuk is really referring to a cow, and it's saying "Chol asher yipol aleha mehem b'maisam yitma." That if there has a part of it that's yipol, that's like dangling off, that's falling, b'maisam, if it were to die, then yitma. Then we look at that limb as if it's detached when it's alive and it's even menachai. But the implication being, had you shechted the animal and it wasn't b'mosam, it didn't just die on its own, but you shechted it, then there would be no yitma. So that's how the Gemara is going to touch up this pasuk. It's not referring to shrotzim, because it's unnecessary by a sheretz to tell me that a dead sheretz. I know a dead sheretz is tameh. Live shrotzim don't give off tumah. It must be this pasuk is referring to cows, and it's saying yipol mehem b'maisam yitma. Then if it were to die, then the part of it that's falling off, the dangling limb, then it's yitma. The implication being, had you shechted the animal, then there would be no yitma. Says the Gemara, what's the point of the pasuk? If it's to tell me that shrotzim are only metama when they're dead and not alive, miniv v'lasam nivka. The pasuk says miniv lasam. Niv lasam means a dead animal. So I already know the shrotzim are only metama when they're dead. So what does the pasuk have to tell me this? Elishmami, no, misa is a nipol and shchita is a nipol. So this pasuk is really referring to a cow. Says the Gemara, Amle Ravad Barav L'Rava Hakrab Shrotzim Ksiv. I understand it's a very nice taich, but the pasuk is the context of the pasuk is not talking about cows. It's not talking about kosher animals. It's talking about shrotzim. So the answer is Amrle im eina in l'shrotzim delabnei shchita ninu tenei in lebehema. The answer to this pasuk is unnecessary because it says bimosam. The word bimosam is extra. Because I already know the animals have to be dead. What's the pshat? It must be bimosam as opposed to shchita. Now, shratzim are not included in shchita, so it must be this pasuk is not referring to shratzim at all. Even though it's in the parsha of shratzim, it's an extra pasuk, and you're supposed to apply it. Because again, the reason why I know it can't be shratzim is because the pasuk is extra. What's the point of the pasuk? To tell me that the shratzim are matamu when they're dead? I already know this. So it must be bimosam masha'enkin shchita, and it's not referring to shratzim. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. You're telling me the whole premise of this drasha is because the pasuk is extra. Is the pasuk really extra? But don't we still need the pasuk? That if a sheretz dies, it only gives off tumah if it's moist, like it was when it died. But once it dries out, like after death, after a while it dries out, then it doesn't give off tumah. So I need that. Bimosam means that even when it's dead, it has to be moist, like it when it died. So you see, the pasuk's not extra. The answer is trei b'maisam. It says the word b'maisam twice. That concept I could learn from the first one. The second one is completely extra to teach me b'mosam mashein b'shchita, referring to this concept of nipo. Now we said in the Mishnah, this next little bit of Gemara is going to be continuation of the flow of the Mishnah. The flow of the Mishnah was that there was a machlekes or meir in the Rabbanon. If you have a limb of an animal, of a fetus of an animal that's sticking out by the shchita, does the shchita remove the tumah from the limb? The meir says no, because the shchita won't allow you to eat the limb, right? You can't eat the limb for sure. So Rabbi says if you can't eat the limb, then the shchita does nothing. The Rabbanan say no, you find by a treifa that if you shech the treifa, it removes the tumah even though it doesn't give a heter achila, so to the limb as well. So the Gemara says, Amr Rav Chizda, machlokes be'ever to uber chai. Rav Chizda feels that the whole machlokes between the Rabbanan and Meir, whether the tumah is removed by this limb, is only where the fetus is still alive. So it's like in the parsha of shchita. So that's when the Rabbanan say the shchita of the mother applies to the shchita of the child as well to remove the tumah. But let's say the fetus were to die and it has a limb sticking out. Divrei akol shchita is a nipple. Everyone agrees the shchita doesn't help. Meaning even the Rabbanan would tell you the shchita doesn't help. Why? Because if the child's dead, then it's not really in the parsha shchita anyway. So the reason why you're allowed to eat is because it's inside the mother, but then the shchita won't actually affect the limb itself, even according to the Rabbanan. It's a little bit hard to understand because the whole premise is that the shchita, the mother, helps the shchita, the child. It's a little bit hard to understand what does it matter whether the limb, the child's alive, not alive. And therefore Rabbi responds, no, Rabbi says, I don't see a distinction. It doesn't make a difference whether the fetus is alive, the fetus is dead. The shchita helps according to the Rabban, and it does not help according to Rameir. Now, the Mishnah then flowed and said that the Rabbanan said the source that shchita. The Mishnah then discussed. We had said before that according to the Rabbanan, the shchita removes the tumah from the limb, and the source is like a treifa. Then the Mishnah said, how do I know that if you shech the treifa, the tumah is removed? I would argue it should be like a chazer, right? Treifa, we're saying if you shecht it, it's not going to be mater achila, but it removes the tumah. If you shecht the chazer, it doesn't remove the tumah because it's not shayach shchita. So treifa as well. So the Mishnah then said, yeah, you can't compare the two. Why? Because treifa had a shas heter. I mean, the chazer was born chazer. Treifa only developed later, so at least it had a time where it was roy l'shchita. So send the Mishnah, what about the fact, what if you have a treifa that was born a treifa? So it should be the same as a chazer. So what's the difference between shchita of a treifa which removes the tumah and shchita of chazer doesn't? So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, well, at least by treifa, it's a cow, so at least it's in the same min of one that's roy l'shchita. As opposed to chazer, it's a different species entirely. The Mishnah then ended off, but there is one type of cow that's the shchita would not help because it's not like a cow at all, and that's a ben ches. If you have an 8-month-old cow, the shchita is not shayach shchita because it's like a rock. It's not considered even a species because it's a nefel. So if you shecht it, the shchita is not removed because we look at it like chazer. The Gemara just has a problem. The Mishnah has said that the ben ches, a cow that's ben ches, is looked as like a different species of a cow. Vatanya, but doesn't the Brisa say ben shmona chayechiach sha'af b'shiyesh b'mino shchita ein shchitosam atares? This Brisa says that an 8-month-old cow, it's in the same species of a other cow, and Adrabah, this Brisa actually uses it to bring a raya that even if it's in the species of a cow, the shechita cannot remove the tumah, and Mishnah, that brisa would want to use it to make problems by treifas and say, well, treifas as well, the shechita shouldn't help. And don't tell me that it's in the same species of a cow, because an 8-month-old cow is also a cow, and the shechita doesn't help. The problem is, our Mishnah said that an 8-month-old cow is a different species, lagamri, that it's not shaykh, the shechita b'chlal. It's not shaykh in the parsha shechita. This brisa says that it is in the same species of a cow, and it is in the parsha shechita. So which one is it? So the Gemara answer is very simple. I'll say what else is here inside. We're talking about, both Bryce and the Mishnah are talking about the same thing. They're talking about an 8-month-old baby inside the mother. An 8-month-old cow that's born, you can't shecht. It's not shayach shchita. The tumah is going to, if it comes out of the animal, it's going to be a nevela, and shchita won't help. Everyone agrees to that. The case is where you have a mother that has an 8-month-old fetus in its stomach. The shaila is the 8-month-old b'chalal shchita vis-a-vis because the mother gets shechted, meaning the 8-month-old on its own is for sure not b'chalal shchita. It's not in the min of shchita. The shaila is when it's in the mother's womb and the mother is a regular healthy cow, does the shchita of the mother make the baby b'chalal the parsha shchita? The Gemara says, Amar Rav Kahana, yesh b'min shchita agav imay. The Tana didan mina de'imay loy parach. The case is where it's in the mother's womb, and the shaila is, does that make it b'chalal the parsha shchita? Our Mishnah says no, because just because you shech the mother doesn't make that the baby is b'chalal the parsha shchita. Maybe the shchita will allow you to eat the baby, but that doesn't mean that the baby is b'chalal min. It could be it's looked at as a rock, but whatever the reason is, the Torah says that if there's a rock in the mother's stomach, you shech the mother, you can eat the baby. Doesn't mean that the baby is now b'chalal shchita. That brisa says no. Now, the Gemara just speaks it out. According to that brisa, that you look at an 8-month-old baby as in the parsha of a cow, it's considered the min of a cow. And yet, because you can't eat it, the shechita doesn't help. So now we have a little bit of a problem. How do you know that if you shech the treifa, the tumah is removed? Our whole source in the Mishnah that if you shech the treifa, the tumah is removed, is because it's a cow, and it's in the min of a cow. So all cows, if you shech it, the tumah is removed. I would have had an 8-month-old baby where you shecht it and the tumah is not removed. So we said that it's not a cow at all. So it's not a shiloh. But now you tell me, according to this brisa, no, an 8-month-old is a cow in halacha, and yet the shechita is not removed. So why don't we say that should be the source to apply it to treifas as well? All treifa animals, if you shecht it, the tumah should not be removed, because now we're saying that 8-month-old is considered a cow, so it's a treifa. So why don't we say that should be the rule? So according to that brisa, how do you know that if you shecht the treifa, the tumah is removed? The pasuk says min habehema. Min habehema implies that not all behemoths give off tumah. Mixes behema tama, mixes ein tama. Which ones give off tumah, which ones don't? Ezezu, zu treifa sheshachta. What's the one behemoth that you can't eat that the tumah is min habehema? Not all behemoths that are asar achila have tumah. Which is the ones that don't? A treifa that you shecht. Okay. Now, one thing you have to know before we start the next Gemara is we're going to get to the bottom of this Amud. There's a Machloikas Tanoim, and that is we've been discussing a Ben Pekua over the last couple dafim, which is that if you shech the mother and you find a fetus inside, you don't have to shech the fetus. The shechita of the mother helps. The truth is, Rameir Shita is that if the fetus is 9 months old, fully 9 months, and alive, you do need to shech the baby. The Rabbanan hold that in all situations, if you shech the mother, the fetus does not need shechita. You could shoot it in the head if it comes out. It's fine. You take it out of the baby. After you shech the mother, you open up the stomach. You have a 9-month-old baby. According to the Rabbanan, shoot in the head. It does not need shechita. Rameir's chiddush is that a 9-month-old does need shechita. That's the chiddush of Rameir. Meaning he would say that if it's a 7th-month-old, fine. If it's dead, fine. But if it's alive and 9 months old, then it requires its own shechita. That's what you have to know as a background. So by Rav Hoshir has a kasha. Hoshir is yadai l'may behema. Let's say a shaychit, again, a metzias, I don't know it's possible. He sticks a knife into the womb, and then the 9-month-old baby inside, v'shachad ben teshachai, and he shechs the 9-month-old baby, and then takes the fetus out while the mother's still alive. So the question is that a kosher shechita? Again, he didn't shech the mother, because he shech the mother, that we already know what the halach is of the baby. He put his hand into the womb, shechted the 9-month-old while the 9-month-old was still in the womb, and then took the fetus out while the mother's alive. The question is that considered a kosher shechita? The Gemara is going to, I'll say it out, so we'll say it in, so the Gemara is going to say, this is a Shaila both according to everybody. According to Rabbi Meir, that requires a Shechita bifnei atzmai of a 9-month-old, you could argue, Rabbi Meir requires a Shechita, but the baby has to come out first, and shechting it in the womb is not considered a Shechita. Or the opposite, Zilu Mazeh. Even the Rabbanon who feel that it does not need a Shechita, that's because the Rabbanon say the Shechita of the mother covers it. But if you don't shech the mother, then the shechita of the baby would suffice. So the truth is, the question is this a kosher shechita? And it's irregardless of that machloekes tanoim. So the Gemara says, Tiboilu Rameir, v'tiboilu Rabbanon. Tiboilu Rameir, ad kan lekam Rameir ben pekur ton shechita. Even though Rameir holds that a 9-month-old baby requires its own shechita, even if you shech the mother, hanimi lehechet yatzlav ha'olam. But maybe that's only once the baby emerges from the womb. But you can't shech it while it's in the womb. Amai ima l'shayla shechita. Perhaps it's not roy l'shchita when it's in the womb, and therefore it's not considered a ma'isa shchita. Oidil mafila rabbanon or zelu mazeh. Even the rabbanon, I could argue, arba simanim achshali rachmana. The rabbanon could argue the opposite. Even the rabbanon would tell you that it doesn't require its own shchita. Had you shechted the mother, it would suffice. But maybe there's a choice. You could either shech the mother or shech the baby. And he shechted the baby, so it should work. So that's the shaila. The shaila is it roy l'shchita when it's still in the womb, conceptually? So Amar Rav Chananya Tashema. Or Rav Chananya says like this. We said in the Mishnah, we were talking about tumah, and we said, right, if you shech the chazer, the tumah is not removed. So we said, but a treifa is. So we said, what's the difference? So first we said, well, treifas are not born that way. Chazer is born that way. So we said, what about treifa that was born that way? So it never had a moment where it was roy l'shchita, so it's like a chazer. What about, so that's the Gemara says, so it looks like a chazer. But wait a minute. If you tell me you could shecht it in the womb, and we're assuming the siman of treifas only developed after it was born, so it comes out, and then it has a hole in the heart. So, we said that it never had a moment where it was roy l'shchita. But what about the fact that you could shecht it in the womb? The fact that you don't mention this implies that shechting in the womb is not an option. To that the Gemara is going to respond, no. Really, maybe shechting in the womb is an option. So how do you know that it never had a moment of treifas? It was never roy l'shchita. What about in the womb? So the Gemara is going to say, very simple. We're talking about a case where the simani treifas, it had the simani treifas in the womb itself. It's not that the simon treifas were only noticed after it was born. It had 5 legs in the womb. Even in the womb, it wasn't roy l'shchita. So the fact that the Mishnah said that that it couldn't shecht it does not mean that you can't shecht it in the womb. Maybe you could, but we're talking about a treifa that had the treifa in the womb itself. Tashema harishan all the treifim in abet and v'misa mashkechas la ha'is l'shas kosher di'boy al yadav v'shachta amalei rava misha noitz treifim in abet and mashkechas la b'ayis chamesh raglayim. So it's not a right either way. It could be taka. Normally you could shecht it in the womb. So why are we talking about a case where it was not roy? We're talking about a case where it had a treifa, simani treifa in the womb itself. It had 5 legs, and therefore that's why you couldn't. Okay, new Mishnah. And this is the Mishnah that's going to discuss the 9-month-old. And the shita of Rav Meir. Hashoichet is a behema. If you shech the mother, umatza ben shmoinachai oimes, and you find a dead fetus, or an 8-month-old baby that's alive, oy ben tishameis, or a 9-month-old fetus that's dead, so there's no shchita shayach because it's dead. So you could eat the fetus because that's the ben pekur. But what you're not allowed to do, says the Mishnah, you're not allowed to eat the fetus's blood. Meaning, don't think that because you can eat the fetus without shechita, there's a heter of dam. Kaira, you have to tear the fetus open, umaytis dam, and remove the blood. Meaning, first halacha is that a ben pekur, while you could eat it without shechita, you cannot consume its blood. Matzah ben tishachai, but let's say you shech the mother and you find in the womb a 9-month-old fetus that's alive. So our Meir shita is ton shechita. Our Meir says that you have to shech the baby as well. The shechita of the mother does not suffice if the baby is alive at 9 months old. And you would be chayiv for killing the mother and the child in the same day. So meaning not only does the baby require its own shechita, you're not allowed to shecht it the day that the mother died. Divra Meir, this is Meir shita, that a 9-month-old fetus inside requires its own shechita. The Chacham say no, shechitas even mitarasai. Go to the next page. The Chacham say no, the shechita of the mother suffices for the baby. And the baby does not require its own shechita. Rishimit Shazuri adds, Afilu ben Chamesh Shana Mechayish Besada Shchitas Imitaresa. Rishimit Shazuri says, that this 9-month-old, he agrees with the Rabbanan, it does not require its own shechita. And he says, not only, you don't have to kill it that day, you could let it be born and take it out of the womb, let it run around, and when it's 5 years old, you could just shoot it in the head. It does not require shechita ever, because it already was shechted once in its life, halachically, by the shechita of the mother. Kara matzah by ben tishachai. Let's say, instead of shechting the mother died naturally, and you open up the womb and there's a baby inside, ton shechita. Then you have to shech the baby, because the mother did not have a shechita. And by the way, this is a pretty obvious halacha that you still have to shech the fetus because the mother didn't go through the process of shechita. Okay. Now, so you have machlekes tanoim whether the 9-month-old fetus requires its own shechita. Amar Rav Elazar Rav Hoshia. Rav Elazar said in the name of Rav Hoshia, Lo hilchu boy ella al iskei shechita bilvad. This 9-month-old baby, according to the Rabbanan, the only kula is shechita. What does that mean? It means while the Rabbanan feel you do not have to shech the 9-month-old fetus, that's the only kula. There's no other kulas. Now, what is he referring to? Lemute mai, lemute chelve v'gidai. So the Gemara says it's lemute chelev and gid, meaning that this 9-month-old baby, although it does not require its own shechita, you're not allowed to eat its chelev, you're not allowed to eat its gid anasha. Okay. Here's the problem. You're telling me universally that the ben pekua, which is the 9-month-old baby that you find inside, that the Rabbanan say you don't need shechita, but you're not allowed to eat the chelev, you're not allowed to eat the gid anasha. I thought it's machlekes tanoim. The Tanya, gid hanasha noig b'shalil, v'chel by asa de Rameir. Rameir says the gid anasha and the chelev of a ben pekua is a problem. Rav Yehuda Noimer, eina noig b'shil, v'chel by mutter. Rav Yehuda says no. Not only do you not have to shech the baby, you're allowed to eat its gid anasha and you're allowed to eat its chelev. Vam Rav Ozam Rav Oshia, machlekes ben tishachai, v'halach Rameir l'shitasai, Rav Yehuda l'shitasai. I mean, the same way they argue whether a 9-month-old baby requires his own shechita, they also argue whether you eat the chelev and the gid. So how could the Gemara say before that the only kula is shechita, but not the gid and not the chelev? Rav Yehuda holds that the gid and the chelev is taka mutter also. So the Gemara says, okay, maybe when we said before that the only heter is shechita, but not the chelev and the gid, it's not talking about a ben peku at all. Elachel b'd gid. Maybe it was referring to that. It's not referring to a fetus at all. Maybe it's referring to stam, an average cow that has a gid anasha. Apparently there's a little bit of fat on top of the gid anasha. And maybe what he was saying is the whole heter of our discussion does not apply to that fat. Meaning, in other words, he's just very simply saying the fat on top of the gid anasha is a problem. Here's the problem with that. Niflek pligi. But that's also a machlekes tanoim. Don't tell me that it's universally accepted that you're allowed to eat the fat on top of the gid anasha. But that's also a machlekes tanoim. The Tanya, gid hanasha, the gid hanasha, mechatet acher b'chol makom shehu. You have to dig anywhere that it's embedded in the flesh. V'choitech shemrei meikara, and you have to remove its fat. Div Rameir. Rameir believes that the fat on top of the gid hanasha is a problem. Rav Yehuda Rav Yehuda says no. Goy mei mashufi. You're allowed to just cut it out, but the level on top of the fat is permitted. So the point is, you see the Rameir and the Rabbanan and Rav Yehuda argue whether the chelev on top of the gid hanasha is mutter. So rather, this is what he meant to say. The whole heter of ben pekua is the shechita. What is aser? Not the chelev and the gid. Bestiality is aser, meaning don't think that because it doesn't require shechita, it's not a behema, it's a behema. And you're not allowed to do klayim, you're not allowed to thresh it with another species. That's all he meant. Okay. Rish Lakish says, Rav Yehuda, who permits the chelev of a ben pekua, he would also permit the blood of a ben pekua. But Rav Meir, who asers the chelev, asers the dam. So Rish Lakish believes dam and the chelev are the same. Rav Yochanan says no. Rav Yochanan says no. The dam of a ben pekua is aser l'kuli alma. The machlekes is chelev. So machlekes is chelev, and the shayla is the dam. Rav Yochanan says it's universally a problem, and Rav Rish Lakish says it's a machlekes. Here's the issue. Our Mishnah says very clearly that the ben pekua kairo yomitz is damai. You have to tear it open and remove its blood. So how could Rish Lakish say that it's a machlokes, that there are those who are matir the dam. I thought the dam is universally a problem. Doesn't the Mishnah say karu mites is damai? So how could you tell me that you're allowed to drink the blood according to Rabbi Yehuda? The Mishnah says mafarish you're not. So Amar Rav Zera says what Rish Lakish would respond is she'ein anish kares. The Mishnah does not mean that you're allowed to drink the blood, because you're not. Rish Lakish does not mean that you're allowed to drink the blood, because the Mishnah says you can't. All Rish Lakish meant is that the dam, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is not chayiv kares. Meaning, the dam of a ben pekua, Rav Meir would say is chayiv kares. Rabbi Yehuda would say is not chayiv kares. You're not allowed to drink it. When he says mutter, he meant ein anush kares. So when the Mishnah says aser, it's true, it's aser. But what that means aser is that it's not chayiv kares. So says the Gemara. So according to Rish Lakish, Rav Yehuda would tell you that the dam of a ben pekua is not kares. So Laman Kamil Rav Yehuda loyal dam tamsis. But wait a minute, doesn't Rav Yehuda hold that the blood that drains out from the animal after the animal dies is also chayiv kares? So why would a ben pekua be any different? Meaning, you tell me according to Rav Yehuda, the ben pekua's blood is not chayiv kares. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the blood that drains up from the animal, that continues to drain after the animal dies, most Tanoim would say it's not chayiv kares because it's not dam and nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda says it is. So that's chayiv kares, but not a ben pekua. What's the difference? The Gemara says the tani dam tamsis bazar Rabbi Yehuda I'm bekares. So Targum Rabbi Yosef the Rav Salah Chasida Kamed Rav Papa is Rabbi Yehuda dam v'chol dam. The answer is Rabbi Yehuda Taka holds the dam tamsis, the blood that drains out of the animal is taka chayiv kares, but not the blood of the ben pekua. What's the difference? Because the pasuk says dam v'chol dam. V'chol dam means dam is referring to the blood of the life force of the animal, and v'chol dam is any blood that drains out afterwards. But a ben pekua doesn't have a life force. The ben pekua doesn't have its own life. It's considered an extension of the mother. So because the ben pekua doesn't have dam hanefesh, it also doesn't have any other dam that's chayiv kares. In other words, the answer is very simple. Yes, the ben pekua's dam is not chayiv kares. But a regular animal's dam hatamsis is chayiv kares. Why? Even the dam hatamsis is not the life force of the animal, but because that animal has a life force blood, all blood is chayiv kares. Ben pekua doesn't have any blood of its own that's significant, because it's not like you shechted anything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have its own life force, and therefore, all right. Last sugya. Iboilu have a kasha. Mau lift is ben pekua. You know, there's a concept called petach hamar. Right, so if you have a firstborn donkey, you either have to kill it, or you could replace it and be poida it with a seh. So what if you have a seh that's a ben pekua, came out from the animal? Can you use that to be poida a donkey? So the Gemara says, Ali but there are mer loiti boilach. According to Meir, it's not a shayla. Why? The kivan davar ton shchita sal malyu. According to Meir, it requires its own shchita. So if it requires its own shchita, it's a full-fledged lamb. There's no shayla. The shayla is, what would the Rabbanan say? The Rabbanan hold that a 9-month-old seh that's found inside the mother's womb does not require its own shchita. So what would the Rabbanan say about using it to be paida a petach hamar? Kivan da amri shchita zim matarasa. Do we say because it does not require its own shchita? Kibsar b'dekuluhu. It's like meat that you find in the store. It's not shaykh to be used. It's not a seh. Aydumba. Even the rod v'asel, rod v'asi, or do you say, listen, this animal's running around, it's running over there, it's running over there. Sekarin be, it's a sheep, so it doesn't require its own shchita, but it looks like a seh, and it smells like a seh, and it makes noise like a seh. So could you use it to be paida petach hamar? Marzutra Amar ein paidin, Rav Ashi Amar paidin. It's machlokes is Marzutra and Rav Ashi. Amar Rav Ashi Marzutra. Rav Ashi said to Marzutra, who said that you cannot be paida. My daitach. Why is it that you can't be paida? Amar seh pesachim, because you learn it out from the Karban Pesach. And therefore, it has to be a seh that's roy l'shchita, like a Karban Pesach. But imal alon zachar tam ben shana, afkan zachar tam ben shana. But you can't learn that from Karban Pesach legamri, because the Karban Pesach has to be within 1 year old. It has to be seh tamim. We don't find that by petach hamar. So Mazutra responded, tifta riva. You're right. I do learn it out from petach hamar from the Karban Pesach. But tifta, extras, to be marbe, that it doesn't have to be within a year, it doesn't have to be male. So Rav Ashi countered, tifta riba, filu kol milinami. Well, if you're going to be marbe, then be marbe ben pekua as well. So imkain says semahanile. He says, then what's the point of seh? Meaning, it says seh by a petach hamar, and it says seh by the Karban Pesach. So that means they have to be similar. In what regard? That it requires shchita a roy l'shchita, which means that it requires to be a non-ben pekua. What about the fact that it doesn't have to be within a year? It could have a mum. It doesn't have to be roy lakrava. It doesn't have to be a roy lakarban. That's tifta. If you're going to be marbe, then marbe everything, marbe even a ben pekua. Then what's the point of seh? So basically, you have these two drushes. You have seh, which is minimizing, and tifta, which is marbe. So how do you reconcile this? The answer is it has to be roy l'shchita, which means it can't be a ben pekua, but it does not have to be male, and it doesn't have to be within the year, and that's from tifta. All right, we'll stop here.